No, I'm just kidding. It's actually me, Mr. BG. So, anyway, today is a very special occasion. It is Halloween. So I thought, what better book to review for Halloween than Pet Sematary by Stephen King? Let's get right into this review. Welcome back to BG's Books. I'm Mr. BG, and today I will be reviewing Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And so, of course, if you haven't noticed by now, my setup is a little bit different this time. Instead of talking about books in front of my bookshelf, I am, of course, right in front of a very creepy and old-looking cemetery. So, I don't know, I just felt it would fit the occasion, so I traveled by plane just down the street, mind you, to the nearest weird cemetery, and so here I am. And that's kind of why I don't have the book with me like I normally do in my other reviews, is because the book is gray, and of course cemeteries are kind of gray and dark and stuff, and I don't really want the book and the background to blend in. So yeah, I don't know, maybe the book can be like right here or something, I don't know, or maybe right here, whatever my editor decides to do with it. But anyway, yeah, Pet Sematary is about the Creed family with the father Lewis, who moved to a small town called Ludlow, Maine, in order for him to be a doctor at the University of Maine. And then, of course, since it's called Pet Sematary, some weird supernatural stuff involving a pet cemetery happens. But yeah, so that is quite the tease, and because it is Halloween, I am of course deciding to review it for this special occasion. I am in costume, as you could see from the intro and this. But yeah, and there's also a scene in Pet Sematary that takes place on Halloween. So there you go. But anyway, yeah, to discuss what Pet Sematary fully entails and my thoughts on it, let's get to the summary, which we will do right now. So Pet Sematary begins with the Creed family moving into Ludlow, Maine. So the father, Lewis, he was a doctor back in Chicago, but he got a job opportunity to be the doctor at the University of Maine. So he uprooted his family from Chicago and moved to Ludlow with his wife, Rachel, his children, Ellie and Gage, and their cat, Winston Churchill, shortened to Church. And so, yeah, Lewis had like a nice house and all that, so they kind of get acquainted. But almost immediately after getting to the house, Ellie is injured by falling off a tire swing or like falling down or something. You can tell I've seen the movie because the tire swing was in the movie. Anyway, she gets briefly injured, so they attend to that. But while they're distracted with Ellie, Gage gets stung by a bee. But luckily, this nice older gentleman across the street named Judd Crandall kind of helps remove the stinger from Gage, and then you know, stuff goes from there. Turns out Judd also has a wife named Norma, and over the next few weeks or so, the Creeds and the Crandalls kind of get acquainted. They start going over to each other's houses all the time. And then Lewis, he kind of lost his father when he was 3, so he sees Judd as kind of like a surrogate father, if you will, so then they start hanging out and become friends and all that. And so things go fine for you know, the next however long. But the first day of school, Lewis's first day is immediately jump-started by getting a mortally wounded man named Victor Pascal, who was injured in a very serious automobile accident. His head has like been ripped open and stuff. It is a grisly sight. And so, you know, because doctors aren't magic, Lewis can't really do anything to help him. But so basically, Victor Pascal's dying words are addressed towards Lewis specifically, warning him about something about the ground being sour. We'll get to that in a second. So anyway, Victor Pascal dies, and then later that night, after Lewis has gone to bed, he sees a vision of Victor Pascal, And then the vision of Victor Pascal kind of leads him to the pet cemetery. I guess I should have mentioned that before the university thing started. Basically, Judd Crandall leads the Creeds down a path that goes from their house, and it leads to this place called Pet Cemetery, mistakenly spelt because it was made by children. And basically, it's just this nice little peaceful place where the children of Ludlow, Maine either bury their pets that were either killed in the highway that is by their house, which has like a bunch of speeding trucks on it, or just pets in general that have passed away. So now that I bring up that forgotten detail, we can get back to the main thing. So, of course, Victor Pascal leads Lewis down there, and he also shows Lewis the deadfall, which is like a bunch of fallen branches or trees or whatever have you. It's like just a bunch of branches and stuff. And then it basically says to not go down that way. The pet cemetery is as far as you can go, because past that deadfall, there's some weird stuff going on. So Lewis is like, okay, that's weird. And then when he wakes up, he finds mud and pine needles on his feet and stuff. So he's like, okay, that's really weird. So then the next little while goes on. The family's just kind of doing some things. Lewis also decides to get church neutered because his thought process is that neutered cats become like lazier and fatter and stuff. And so church might not wander into the road if that happens. So he gets that taken care of pretty quickly. And then everything goes solid until Halloween, where, of course, as normal, Lewis and Judd are kind of talking on the Crandall porch, drinking a couple beers and stuff. And so Norma takes Ellie and a couple other kids inside so that they can get some candy. And then she just like falls and like has a cardiac event or coronary event or something. Anyway, long story short, something happens. She falls. Lewis takes care of her. She goes to the hospital. She's perfectly fine. So there you go. So yeah, anyway, and then the next couple months happen, and it is Thanksgiving, and so Rachel is taking the kids to see her parents back in Chicago, and her parents do not like Lewis in the slightest for a lot of different reasons. So Lewis decides to stay behind in Ludlow while Rachel and the kids go back to Chicago for Thanksgiving, of course. So then around Thanksgiving, Lewis receives a call from Judd Crandall saying that there's a dead cat on Judd's lawn and that it might be Church. So Lewis goes over there, and unfortunately it is Church. He was killed by one of the high-speeding trucks in the highway. And so basically Judd decides to help Lewis, like, get him over to the pet cemetery so that they can bury him. Meanwhile, Lewis is trying to figure out how he's going to tell this to Ellie, who, mind you, was like 5 or 6 by this point, so she doesn't really understand the whole concept of death yet. Mostly because of Rachel, which we will also discuss in a second. But, so yeah, Lewis thinks that they're gonna bury Church in the pet cemetery, but Judd insists on going past the deadfall to the real cemetery. Keep in mind, Victor Pascal recently just warned Lewis about not going past the deadfall, so, you know, stuff is getting weird. Anyway, they go a long time, like they're hiking and stuff all the way over there, and then Judd ends up taking Lewis to this place called the Micmac Burial Ground, which I guess hundreds of years prior was made by Micmac Indians to bury their loved ones. And so according to some instructions by Judd, you know, like every man buries his own, you have to build like a certain cairn or whatever. Lewis buries Church and then just kind of goes on about his life. And then the next afternoon, Church just kind of comes back, and something isn't right about that cat. And of course, Lewis is very, very confused about what happened. Judd had also told him about this thing that we'll get into later on. But anyway, so Church basically got revived by the Micmac burial ground. And basically, he isn't exactly the same. He was once docile. He didn't really hunt anything. But now he just has an insatiable need to hunt things. And he also just growls at Lewis, which means he's a lot more aggressive than he used to be. So Lewis is just kind of like, okay, this is very weird. So then, of course, he talks to Judd about it, who's very confused as to why Church is still alive. And then, Judd decides to tell him about his dog Spot, who died due to his father kind of mercy killing him after a run-in with rusted barbed wire. And then so he and a friend went down to that burial ground, buried Spot, and then Spot came back, and then Spot later died of old age where he was resting in the pet cemetery. And so Lewis is like, okay, that's really weird, but he also notices that Church just smells very bad. Like Church does not smell like he used to anymore. You can the way it works is that you can clean however long you can, and even though the thing might be physically clean, it will always smell of the ground they were buried in. So Church just kind of forever has that weird little smell. Anyway, so yeah, Rachel and the kids come back from Thanksgiving. Of course, Lewis does not tell Ellie what has gone on. And so, yeah, stuff just kind of goes on for the next several months or so. They celebrate Christmas and whatever, have a nice little family, although Ellie does not want Church in her room anymore because of how bad he smells. But so, yeah, the next thing happens in January of the next year where Mrs. Crandall suddenly dies of, I think it was a heart attack or something similar to a heart attack. And of course, the Creeds have become very friendly with the Crandalls since then. So Ellie is kind of very heartbroken about it. And so Lewis wants to take her to Norma's funeral, which Rachel is a bit apprehensive to for something that we will finally figure out. Basically, back when Rachel was a child, she had an older sister named Zelda who was afflicted with this very serious condition named spinal meningitis. It broke her back, or not broke her back, but it deformed her very severely, and then it eventually took her while she was alone and her parents were away from home for something, and so she was kind of left alone to deal with the dying Zelda and whatever, and that kind of traumatized her from death or even talking about death. But anyway, Lewis is like, come on, she's going to know about death anyway eventually, so you might as well just let her go. And so Rachel is just like, all right. So yeah, Lewis takes Ellie to the funeral, and then it's like a nice little funeral. And then nothing happens until May, where unfortunately Gage, the little toddler, he's the baby, he gets flattened by a truck in the same highway that killed Church. Yeah, this book goes there. And so now the Creeds have just been destroyed. They've just been mentally destroyed. And of course, Lewis, being the way he is, he starts to think, if that place can bring back Church, what if I brought back Gage with it? And then Judd senses what he's thinking about, and he's like, no, stop. And so he tells Lewis about the story of this guy named Timmy Baterman. So basically the story goes is that Timmy Baterman was a soldier in World War II, and he was killed in Italy. So after getting his body transported back to the U.S., his father, Bill, decided to bury him in that Micmac burial ground. And then literally days later, a lot of the Ludlow citizens found Timmy Baterman walking around even though they knew he was dead. And not only was he a little more hostile, but he also seemed to know secrets that he never would have known about the other civilians. So people are kind of starting to get suspicious. Anyway, long story short, the story ends with Bill killing Timmy again, setting the house on fire, and then shooting himself. And so basically Judd warns Lewis to not bring back Gage using that burial ground because Gage will be gone, and instead a demon-like creature will be taking up the body. So this book goes into the mythology of a creature called the Wendigo. I don't really do all that mythology stuff, so I don't really know all of what the Wendigo does, but basically what I can tell is that it's kind of bad news, and Judd thinks that maybe because he showed Lewis the burial ground, the Wendigo kind of had Gage die in order to get some sort of power. I don't know, it's confusing. Anyway, so Lewis is like, okay, fine, I won't bury him in that place. But of course he does, in true Stephen King fashion. So he convinces Rachel and Ellie to go back to Chicago to be with their parents. And then he says, give me like 3 to 4 days, like finish things up here, and then I'll go to Chicago and meet up with you guys. So then he goes to the cemetery, exhumes Gage's body, and then of course buries him in that burial ground. And then in the night, stuff does not go well. Gage, coming back as the Wendigo demon vessel thing, goes into the Creed house, steals Lewis's scalpel, and then manages to kill Judd. But while in Chicago, I should mention this, Ellie has some prophetic dreams about this man named Pascal, also known as Pascal for Victor Pascal, warning her about something going on in Ludlow, and that scares Rachel into going back to Ludlow in a hurry. So anyway, after Judd gets killed and stuff, Rachel ends up back at the Crandall house many hours later, and then she finds that Gage has returned from the grave, and she is subsequently killed as well. So the next morning, Lewis figures out that some stuff has gone on because he sees Gage's footprints and his scalpel is missing. And so he decides that, okay, I got to put Gage down. So what he does is he loads up a bunch of morphine, and then he goes to the Crandall house. He kills Church first. And then after discovering the bodies of Judd and Rachel, he has a bit of a confrontation with Demon Gage and puts some morphine in him, and then Gage is dead. And so what he decides to do is that he decides to come back with some lighters and some lighter fluid, like some gasoline or whatever, and just burn down the Crandall house. But it's not done yet, because as the fire is kind of getting situated, Lewis has exited with the body of Rachel. Because, to quote Lewis, because he waited too long with Gage came back all weird and stuff, and because Rachel had just died, if he revives Rachel, she'll be normal. I think that's a terrible and bad idea, but Lewis doesn't. Anyway, one of his doctor friends at the University of Maine, Steve Masterton, kind of confronts him about this, and then he's scared and leaves. And then so Lewis buries Rachel up in the Micmac burial ground. And then in the final scene of the book, Lewis has been playing some cards in his house when finally the reanimated body of Rachel puts her hand on his shoulder and says, darling. And that is how Pet Sematary ends. Alright, so before I get into my main thoughts about Pet Sematary, I of course want to discuss like the major themes that it has, which is death and coping with death. And of course, death is something that happens to us all. None of us can escape death, whether it's a very premature, violent, or peaceful at our time death. Death always comes for us. And Stephen King, he had a lot of stuff going on when he wrote this book. So basically, the story behind this is that he got a job at the University of Maine to be an English teacher or something, much like Lewis Creed. And so he moved to like a house nearby in Maine, and his daughter had a cat that also got ran over in the road, so they buried it up in the pet cemetery, spelled the same way and everything. So that's kind of where the Pet Sematary stuff came from it. But Stephen King also mentioned that while living in this area, his youngest son, Owen King, ran near the road, and he doesn't know if he either caused Owen to fall down or if Owen tripped himself. But either way, Owen did not managed to not get flattened by a truck. So Stephen King started wondering what would happen if he did get flattened by a truck. So then that's kind of where the Gage stuff came in. But so yeah, that's kind of the background of where Pet Sematary came from. Of course, it is very dark and disturbing because, it's about death. It's about how death is inevitable and nothing we can do can ever stop it. And for the most part, I think the book handles it very well. Like, of course, Lewis, our main character, he is very paranoid. He's a doctor, so, like, he has a lot of experience with death, but yet he tries to do things that should not be physically possible, like resurrect the dead, such as the burial ground does. So he's kind of a very oddballish character. He's actually one of my favorite Stephen King characters, by the way, just because of how complex it is. He also reminds me a bit of myself with like being paranoid. I'm a little paranoid in my life, so not as much as Louis Creed though, but just a little bit. So I kind of understand Lewis's paranoia, I guess you could say. But anyway, so yeah, I believe that Stephen King handles death, the discussions of death, and all the wrong ways of coping with death very expertly in this book. I mean, of course, he's a legend for a reason. Pet Sematary is considered to be one of his best books for a reason. And it also is considered to be one of his darkest books. I wouldn't say that. And it's also considered to be one of his scariest books. I wouldn't say that either. I'd say that Rage is both of those, but of course I did another video on that entirely. But Pet Sematary is certainly unnerving. It is certainly pretty terrifying, especially if you're a parent who has younger children that may or may not run out into the road sometimes. So if you're a parent, this book will like scare you. I am fortunate enough to not be a parent, but hey, I understand that. There's a lot of stuff going on. But it's also just kind of painful in general for anyone who's like lost a pet or a family member. It's like, this is my second time reading the book. I guess I should have mentioned that earlier. But I've read this book before, and the thing that changed about this time was that last time I read the book, my dog was alive, and then reading it this time, I've unfortunately lost my dog since then. So that was kind of a little saddening reading this book about dead animals and stuff. So that's kind of a little emotional for me. I wasn't like sad or anything. I was just like, yeah, I kind of get it being sad about the death of your pet and stuff because I lost my dog. But anyway, yeah, as I said, Pet Sematary is just a fantastic book about death and having those really uncomfortable discussions with death, because Stephen King himself even talked about this in interviews, is that you should not shy away children from hearing about death. You should explain to them what death is, how it could possibly happen, that it's a part of life, and, you know, so on and so forth. So for the most part, I think Pet Sematary is just a very solid book. I really have no problems with it other than that abrupt ending that I told you about in the summary. But yeah, Pet Sematary is just a really solid book about death and coping with death. And I think everyone who has not read it should give it a chance, and everyone who has read it should give it another chance, because it is just a fantastic book. So please go read Pet Sematary. But yeah, guys, that is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed my review for Pet Sematary. As I said, it is just a fantastic book that deals with how to cope with death perfectly. Well, I guess not really how to cope with death, but it certainly goes over like the feelings of death and whatever. And so yeah, it's just a fantastic book. So please go read it if you have not already, and maybe check out the first movie. But yeah, anyway, as I said, that is the end of the video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below if you have not. I've been Mr. BG. This has been BG's Books.
Guess who's back, you loser?
Stephen King? Oh, again? I thought we resolved all of our issues off screen.
What are you talking about? What do you think of my shirt?
Brains are awesome. Oh, thanks, man.
No, read the rest of it.
I wish everybody had one. Oh, well, that's very mean.
Dead animals, get that jerk! Take that, you jerk!
Ow.